Welcome to episode 57 of the Tax Professionals podcast. This episode is all about how to win and generate more tax work with expert guest Mark Lee.
Welcome to the Tax Professionals podcast, the podcast dedicated to helping you improve your tax career. Here's your host, Jack Bonehill.
Mark has been many things. He's been tax partner in 2 large firms, a tax consultant, chair of the ICAEW's tax faculty, but now he runs the Tax Advice Network, provides NED-style mentoring to accountants and tax people, and he also regularly speaks on webinars and at conferences. One of his 2 focuses nowadays is to help accountants, including tax professionals, to build more successful practices and to be better remembered, referred and recommended, which is what leads us onto the topic for this episode: winning more tax work, generating more tax work, bringing in more tax work, whatever you want to call it. Mark has great experience in this area, as before he decided to move away from practice, he'd had roles where marketing, business development and similar were a big part of his role. Although the term he likes to use is practice development, as accountants don't tend to like the word marketing. Winning work is an area that I know many tax professionals find difficult and are afraid of. I know I was. The big issue for me was not knowing where to start. I knew marketing was an option, I knew calling people was an option, I knew sending out emails was an option, but I didn't really know how to make any of those activities result in winning work. And having Mark's advice about 3 years ago would have been ideal for me, so I think you'll like this episode, even if you're just looking for new ideas on how to win more tax work. The episode starts with a humble and honest overview of Mark's career, where you get a feel for his expertise before we move on to the 5 M's of marketing: motive, market, message, media, and method. And all of these can be used with marketing on social media. We then have a discussion around why many of us tax professionals aren't natural salespeople, so that you can understand how to change your mindset and approach. We talk about how to help people understand what you do, so that when they need your services, they come to you or refer people to you. We talk about how to help people understand what you do, so that if they need the services that you offer, they will come to you. If they know people who need the services that you offer, they can refer people on to you. We also talk about how to generate more work from your firm's current client base rather than bringing in external new clients. The episode finishes with Mark's advice around what to avoid doing if you want to win more tax work. Rough timings for each of these sections can be found in the details section of the episode within your podcast player, or by heading on over to the show notes for this episode at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP57. The previous episode of the podcast is with guest Chris Maslin, who shares his story around building a few different tax businesses, along with his advice. It was part of the Tax Career Success Secrets series. The next episode, which will be released on 10th of October, will be a solo episode with just me about my experience of joining a CTA technical committee, so that you can understand the benefits of joining an ATT or CTA technical committee and how to join one yourself if you'd like to. You can find these episodes in your podcast player of choice or by heading on over to thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com. If, like me, you're interested in knowing what you're worth in terms of salary, then get in touch with James from the Tax Recruitment Company to benchmark what you're currently on. From his interaction with many different businesses and tax professionals, he has current knowledge of salary rates based on experience and specialism. You can contact James on 07768 252 252 at j.howell@thetaxrecruitmentcompany.co.uk, or book a call with him via thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/salary chat to benchmark your salary or discuss potentially available roles, particularly if you work in corporation tax, as he is currently recruiting for many roles in this area. You don't need to remember James's contact details. They're all included in the details section of your podcast player and in the show notes at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP57. All links and materials mentioned in this episode are also in the show notes. Without further ado, let's get to the episode. Mark, just to start us off then for today, could you just tell us a little bit about you and your, in inverted commas, tax career? I know tax has been used loosely here because you've moved away a bit from that now.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And thank you very much for inviting me to be on your excellent podcast, Jack, as well. I trained and qualified at a small firm of accountants, and I could share lots of excuses as to why it took me 2 attempts to pass each of my professional exams, but no excuses. It is what it is. So once I'd qualified, it was a question of deciding what did I want to do with that qualification, having chosen accountancy because it just allowed me to have so many options, I thought. But once I'd qualified, I realised that the only subject I really enjoyed studying was tax. It was also the only exam I'd passed first time. And also, I think I realised even back then, and this was at a time when tax rates were pretty much at their highest, top rate of income tax 83% plus 15% investment income surcharge. It's almost impossible to conceive of. So you compare top rate of tax of 98%. So clearly people were prepared to spend a lot of money to reduce their tax bills because essentially everything they paid, they were only keeping everything they generated, they were only keeping at best 17% and at worst 2%. So I decided to specialise in tax, and I moved to what was then TÜV Ross, it's now Deloitte, to train in and specialise in tax. And it was there that I first got involved in tax training, a subject I've no doubt will come back to. And I have memories of doing a lot of role playing and acting during the courses that we ran back then. I started studying for what we now think of as the CTA exams. In those days, it was ATII. Nobody was ever absolutely sure exactly what all those letters stood for. It was called the Chartered Institute of Tax. And I remember I had a full-time job, and I was listening to your interview with Keith Gordon recently and how he was fitting in his studying with his working. And I decided to do most of my studying at the weekends. And I remember sitting at home at my desk one Saturday morning after I'd been hard at work/studying for 2 or 3 hours, thinking, why am I doing this? And I was doing it to boost my tax knowledge and expertise and also my career. But at the time I was at what was then one of the big 8, now one of the big 4 firms of accountants. And I realised that if I took the exams and failed, that would damage my career if I stayed at the firm. If I took them and passed, it probably wouldn't make a great deal of difference if I moved on, because I would have the kudos of having been trained in tax at TÜV Ross, Deloitte. And so I decided not to continue passing the exams. There didn't seem to be enough potential upsides if you did a sort of decision tree thing. And I have to say that within 2 or 3 years, I realised that whilst it might not hold my career back, the credibility of the exams was such that within 2 or 3 years, I encouraged anybody moving into tax, and still do, to do the CTA exams. Just no question about it. Did it hold me back not doing them? Well, I'll let listeners be the judge of that. I never felt it did. It's certainly possible I might have had more of a long-lasting love for tax if I'd done the tax exams. Who's to say? So there I was at TÜV Ross, progressed to manager and did a management development course, came out of that and concluded, I don't want to stay and become a partner at this firm. Long story behind that, which I won't go into now. I've written about it, I think. If I haven't, I will, as I tend to. I left to join and to head up the tax function at a 10-partner firm in London. I was 29. It was overly ambitious of me and of them. And I talked about this in a recent article in Taxation magazine. I left within the year and moved to what was then Clark Whitetail. It's now Crowe, UK. And I progressed from tax senior manager, group manager, to tax partner there. I was there for 10 years. Enjoyed my time there. I developed the self-assessment task force. This was at the beginning of the whole self-assessment tax system in the mid-90s. I conceived, created and developed the first tax planning software for accountants called CyberTax. I hope you get that. This CyberTax begins with CYB, which was also current year basis, which was a new concept in those days. Before that, we'd had the prior year basis of assessment.
Must admit, that went straight over my head though then, Mark, until you said it.
Frank, it went over most people's head, even back then, but I thought it was a great name. I also co-wrote my first book then, The Essential Guide to Self-Assessment, with a couple of colleagues, and I was really loving it all. And then BDO headhunted me to be lead tax partner of their professional practices group. I really didn't think I would go, that I would jump ship, but they persuaded me, and an ex-colleague who had left Clark Whitehill to join BDO also encouraged me, and I made the move. And it was a very different firm, but I loved it. And I progressed there. I was heavily involved in marketing, as I had been with the tax softwares, another subject we'll come back to. Marketing and promoting the professional practices group. I'd been doing a lot of speaking and promotion of the professional practices group I was involved with at Clark Whitehill as well. And I was really enjoying life. Then a little over 20 years ago, starting to give away my age if it wasn't apparent from some of the things I've already said, a little over 20 years ago, there was a big partners meeting looking at how we were going to make the firm more profitable. And long story short, there are only two possibilities. One was to recruit hundreds of staff. The other was to reduce partner numbers. And the latter was what they decided. I was a bit sort of last in, first out. And I remember to help me feel better about things, the number of partners who were staying who kept saying, "Are we doing losing Mark Lee? We shouldn't be losing Mark Lee. He's a great asset. He's got a high profile." And indeed, it was because of my profile that BDO had headhunted me in the first place. I'd been writing a lot for professional mags. I'd become press spokesman. I knew a lot of the tax journalists. And I remember when I left BDO, a huge number of us left, about 20% of partners. And one of my colleagues, who was 10, 15 years older than me, came into my office and said, "Mark," he said, "accountancy age, you've got it all wrong. They're saying that this is early retirement. It's not. They're kicking us all out. They're just cutting partner numbers. You've got to get the real story out there." And I remember looking at him in absolute astonishment, going, how is it going to help any of our careers to say that we've been selected to be cut rather than accept that it's simply early retirement? Yeah, go with it. And we did. There was never any clarification. I certainly wasn't going to put any clarification out there, although the journalists would have loved the story. And on leaving BDO, we had a very generous package, to the extent that, given the stage I was in my career, I'd been a tax partner in two large firms, and I had concluded I didn't want to be a tax partner anymore. There was too much audit versus tax infighting, and I'd started in the days when every limited company needed an audit. It's very different now, of course, when perhaps not audit v tax, but general practice versus tax, to the extent that it still happens. And as I said in my recent article in Taxation, clearly it does still happen. But I didn't want to do that anymore. And I did consider leaving the world of tax. Now, you may be aware of a wonderful tax guru, a lovely fellow called Robert Mars, MAAS. He's somewhat older than me. He's now a consultant to Carter Winter, I think. They may have a new name now. But he was everywhere, very highly renowned. And I remember after a CIOT event, we went out for a drink. And he said, "Don't leave tax, Mark. The world of tax needs personalities with enthusiasm like you. There must be a way for you to stay in tax." And he knows this, I've always been forever grateful to him for encouraging me to stay in tax at that stage. I had, I think, 15 interviews with different types of firms, 2 or 3 with firms that wanted me to become a tax partner in the firm, which I wasn't going to do. I looked at going full time into tax training and lecturing, concluded that might be good for my career at that stage, but would I still want to be doing just that 10, 20 years down the line? And steered away from that. Took a role without portfolio at what was then the largest tax consultancy in the country. It was called WJB Chiltern. And it was an amalgam of a number of different tax consultancies. And I joined as sort of head of tax business development, really, but was very soon asked to take on running the tax support for professionals team, which enabled me to do a lot of marketing and business development. They did a huge number of seminars around the country. And as head of the team, I went to a lot of those seminars and felt that I should be speaking. But although I still had some obligations to fulfill as a speaker for conference organisers and course providers, I realised I wasn't safe as a tax lecturer anymore. I wasn't as up to date with everything. There were just some special topics that I enjoyed keeping up to date with. So I looked for other things I could talk about. And that was when I first started talking about, I learned to avoid the M word. So we called it practice development, because accountants didn't want to hear about marketing. We'll come back to that later as well. And we will genuinely come back to all of these things that I've said we'll come back to later on, I know.
I hope you've got the list, Mark.
I was talking about practice development related issues. I also realised that there was a lot of mileage in talking about how to avoid professional negligence claims, because the team I was running was providing tax support to other professionals, largely accountants. And it was important to help the accountants who came to the seminars to recognise that they might need our services every now and again. And that one of the reasons for that is when you're tempted to advise on topics outside your area of expertise. And essentially, the advice back then and now is don't do it. So that's one of the things I started talking about. And I was there for a few years. Then I got headhunted again. I was very lucky. I got headhunted twice. This time I was headhunted to be managing director of a tax consultancy in London and to grow it from nothing. So within 18 months, we'd grown it to over £1 million in turnover through a couple of minor acquisitions. We then had a falling out, a disagreement. I thought I still had a future. The owners thought I didn't. So we parted company. It was quite unpleasant and not an experience I care to talk about or relive. But there I was, coming up for 50, it was in my late 40s, thinking, what am I going to do now? I've had a good tax career. During this time, by the way, I'd been elected vice chair, then deputy, and then chair of the tax faculty. I'd represented the ICAW at meetings with MPs, with Treasury, with HMRC, in addition to all my speaking and writing. And I'd loved all of that, but my heart wasn't in tax anymore. I sat back. I'd had some outplacement counselling when I'd left BDO, and I reflected on all that and concluded that what I really wanted to do was focus on those elements of my career I had really enjoyed the most: speaking, writing, and mentoring. And I carried on doing a few tax lectures on areas that I enjoyed, but quickly realised that I really didn't want to have to keep up to date in order to do that. And I specifically remember one occasion when I was asked a question on something tangential to what I was talking about. And I remember thinking as I gave the answer, I don't know if that's right. I just hope it is. And I thought, that is dangerous. I'm never going to do that again. So I checked afterwards. It was right. But that feeling of panic made me realise I wasn't going to lecture on tax anymore. And so whilst I speak extensively, I was speaking at conferences and branch events, and now I tend to do webinars more than anything else. I stick to the subjects that I'm comfortable talking about, that people want to hear about. And it's still how to be better remembered, referred, recommended, practice development, marketing related, get more business, improve your networking, how to use LinkedIn. And also occasionally we stray into how to avoid negligence claims, because, and this is the final part of my very long answer to your to your question. In 2007, so 15 years ago, I started something called the Tax Advice Network, which was in effect an online version of the tax support for professionals team that I ran at Chiltern. All of the members are self-employed tax advisors with a good degree of experience, and in effect, they outsource their marketing or their promotion online to us, and we promote the Tax Advice Network, also accessible through findertaxadvisor.online, and I promote that to accountants and others who need tax expertise that goes beyond their own abilities. And that's my only ongoing involvement in the world of tax.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I talk about how to avoid professional negligence claims, because it's a way of referencing Tax Advice Network as a support mechanism to help you if you need that degree of support.
So your main focus now then, Mark, can you just tell us a little bit more about that? I know it's related to like marketing and business development for accountants and tax advisors and similar, but kind of how would you describe it?
Well, it has sort of two sides to it, really. One is boosting the Tax Advice Network in order to encourage more traffic to the findertaxadvisor.online website, relevant traffic, not people looking for free advice. We say it's a tax advice worth paying for. So I have that, and at the same time, trying to help more specialist tax advisors to appreciate the benefits of joining the network. We have a simple monthly fee, and if anybody's listening and has taken a look and thought, I don't want to do that, I'd love to know why, because I haven't really done the research to find out why some tax advisors look at it and go, no, I'm not joining that. I'm going to carry on doing everything by myself. Because all the existing members, most of whom have been there for years and renew their, either pay monthly or renew their subs annually, come back year after year because it's clearly so cost effective. So I have one focus around the Tax Advice Network. The other one is very much the speaking and mentoring to help accountants and tax people, and I'm going to be doing some more with the CIOT this year, to build more successful practices, to be better remembered, referred and recommended, and related topics. And I found myself to be a bit of a, if I say LinkedIn guru, that's overstating it, because I don't specialize in LinkedIn. But what I have been doing for years, since social media first became a thing, I've been debunking the hype. And I still do that to this day. I said many years ago, don't think of Twitter as a resource for accountants and tax people to get work. It works for a few people, not very many, waste of time used for that purpose by many other people. I've said the same thing as regards many other new social media platforms that have come along. I've never said it about LinkedIn, because LinkedIn can be a fantastic resource. But what I do there is I do debunk the hype that encourages people to post stuff that's not going to help them achieve their objectives. And I suppose, I thought I might mention this later, but I'll mention it now because it seems relevant here, Jack. I talk about the 5 M's a lot of any form of marketing or business development or practice development. The first one is motive. Before you decide to mess around on any social media platform or LinkedIn, or to go to networking events, or if you've got your own business or practice, do any form of marketing, clarify your motive. That's the first M. What is it you want to achieve? And the clearer and more precise you can get at, the better. So with LinkedIn, for example, it might be to advance your career. It might be to generate new clients within the practice you currently work. It might be to generate new clients for your own practice. It could be something else, but be very clear as regards what your motive is. The second M is think about who your market is. Who is it you want to reach? Who do you want to engage? Who do you want to influence? Who do you want to have an impact on? It's not everybody on LinkedIn. The third M is message. What's the key message you want your market to get that will help you towards your motive? The fourth M, and this is crucial, the fourth M is what's the best media to use to get your message to your market to achieve your motive. And this is why I say that typically Twitter or Clubhouse, Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok are probably not the ideal media to get your message to your market to achieve your motive. Now, there are exceptions. I'll certainly make exceptions for Facebook if your target audience is very active on Facebook. And Facebook can be great as a recruitment tool for accounting and tax firms, and to generate certain types of business, but not typically to attract and engage these leaders of big businesses across the board. Mm-hmm. So the fourth M is media, and the fifth M is what methods will you use with that media to get your message to your market to achieve your motive. And by methods, coming back to LinkedIn, which is where I started on this, is it going to be helpful? Is it going to be worthwhile? Is it going to be a good use of time and effort to keep putting out loads of posts on LinkedIn and hoping that your ideal market, your ideal target audience is going to see them and engage with them and then somehow book you or engage you to be their tax advisor? And the answer is probably not. That's probably not the best way of using LinkedIn. There are other ways in which you can use LinkedIn that will help you achieve your objectives, your motive, more effectively than that. So I debunk the hype, which is why I strayed into all that. I debunk the hype around LinkedIn, and which I consider to be an online business networking platform. And I also debunk the hype about using social media without being clear as regards your motive, your market, and your message.
So my first question then on the 5 M's, Mark, is around the motive, I suppose, because can you have more than one motive, or does that become then too confusing to people who are like reading your posts, etc., or whatever method you go for? So can you have more than one motive, or do you recommend only having one?
I recommend starting with one, certainly. And of course you can have more than one motive. And in answering one of your earlier questions, I've indicated I have two main areas of business now, and my posts on LinkedIn sometimes reference one, sometimes reference the other. I'm probably long enough in the tooth, and my profile is probably clear enough that I get away with it, but it's perfectly feasible that I confuse some people who think of me as only being a mentor and who are not aware of the Tax Advice Network. And equally, for many years after I left tax consultancy, and even though my LinkedIn profile and everything I was writing about was not about tax, I was still being approached by people who wanted me to give them tax advice. And I haven't given anybody tax advice for 15 years. So I have to be, I try to be very clear. And there is no doubt you have more success if you have clarity as regards your motive and what you want people to do. But most of us, and again, this flies contrary to most of the advice you get from marketing and social media gurus, most of us have more than one objective in mind. So I'm quite sure there's people listening to your podcast who want to progress their careers, anticipate that probably means staying where they are, but would be open to moving elsewhere. But also want to try and generate some leads. And the problem is that their profile just looks like a bloody CV and hasn't been updated for a long time. So it's confusing everybody because it's not actually helping them towards any of their objectives.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And actually going back before I started the podcast, I think my motives would have been exactly what you were talking about there, trying to generate some business and also just being out there and known in the tax world for, I suppose, potential opportunities that might be out there. I think it's changed a little bit now. You're probably still doing those things, but more focus on now on just building my profile within the, I suppose, the tax world. so that I can help get the podcast message out and help more people from it.
And you know what, Jack? So even if that is your primary objective and you've got sort of a subliminal objective to be as successful as you can possibly be in your career, by leading the podcast with the sincerity that you have and the clear ambition to help others, those actions of themselves will help your career in any way, in any event.
Yeah. It's almost like if you can focus on one thing and do that one thing really well, it will automatically help you with other things as well. So if you have one strong motive, it's clearly going to just help automatically with some other areas as well. I think that's almost what you're saying.
It is foot, I think is what you're talking about. Focus on one thing.
Oh, it's actually got an acronym for it as well.
Yeah, it's not one I use. I just came across it the other day because I like acronyms. Most acronyms are TLAs, 3-letter acronyms. Foot is a flaw, FLAW, a 4-letter acronym word. How about that for a load of nonsense?
There we go. Because you've already used your 5 M's and you've got, looks like 3 R's as well. I think you didn't call them that earlier, but...
I could give you 4 P's as well, but I won't. No, I do like all of those.
Yeah, I can tell. Just a reminder, to benchmark your salary, find out what you're worth or discuss available tax roles, get in contact with James at the Tax Recruitment Company on 07768 252 252 at j.howell@thetaxrecruitmentcompany.co.uk or book a call with him via thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/salary chat. All these contact details are included in the show notes at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP57 or in the details section of the episode within your podcast player. I think for a lot of us that work in tax, winning work is not something that's natural to us. Selling and trying to win work just is not what we were built for in most cases. We go in there because we like the technical, we like the detail, we like giving advice. Would you say, in your experience, what would you say kind of the main reasons are for us not being naturally good at generating or winning work and the related things?
Well, I think, first of all, I'd say I think the world is changing slightly in a good way, potentially in a challenging way. But the most obvious reason is we've not been trained to do it. There's pressure very early on to pass professional exams, to understand the technical background and develop one's technical knowledge. And then we misinterpret the obligation to do CPD, continuing professional development, as being just to keep up to date with tax and technical development. But CPD, the clue is in the title of the acronym, continuing professional development. So that means doing more than just keeping up to date technically and being technically competent. It means having all of the business, personal and professional skills you need to make a success of your career, whatever success means to you. And I think related to that is the fact that no one tells you early enough in your career how important it is to be able to win work. And that's partly because it was less important 20 or 30 years ago. So if you have mentors in your firm or people you know in the profession, they perhaps didn't have to do it. The pressure wasn't on them to do it at an earlier stage in their career. And then related to that, also you get the fact that for all the reasons that you've just said, Jack, when we go into tax, we love understanding the nuances, the differences. We even say that we love the fact it's constantly changing. At least I did that when I started in tax. By the time I've been doing it 10 or 15 years, I hated the fact it was constantly changing. We're used to having the work introduced to us by general practice partners. And in some general practice firms, there's no incentive for them to encourage the tax people to become partners, because partners take a share of the profits rather than just a salary. So it's perfectly feasible that there's a whole host of tax people around who won't become partners because they haven't had the support and development to build their skills necessary to be a partner. And there's a range of skills you need, and being good at tax is not enough. It never has been.
Out of all the different things that you, I suppose, help people with then in terms of kind of winning work and generating leads, etc., what do you think are like the most beneficial activities that we as tax professionals can do to win more tax work? Because I know you obviously there's so many, we don't need to do all of them, do I? I imagine there's a few kind of key areas that a lot of people can do that will make a real big difference for them. In your experience, what are those ones? When
I was at Clark Whitehill, I instituted a concept called Managers Networking Lunches, and another acronym, MNL, but that one was my initials, Mark Lee. I don't think I need to share my middle initial. Name, not something I'm very proud of. And Managers Networking Lunches was, I thought, I was a manager at the time, and the idea was that it was to help us develop our networking skills. We had 4 managers, each of whom invited 4 guests. We had a dining room in-house, so there was no direct cost to this. And the idea was that our guests would be our equivalents in the large clients that we dealt with. So people who were not decision makers yet, but who might be in the future. And it was to help us, it was an idea I conceived, but it was to help us all develop and build our networking skills, watch other people doing it, have everybody say something at the event. This was long before I knew how business networking events operated. I've just realised I was doing it because it seemed common sense, I suppose.
Yeah.
And nobody was forced to speak if they didn't want to. You spoke to the people on both sides of you. We may even have moved around the table after the main course. And the idea was that we weren't going to generate new clients so much as build and strengthen our relationships with existing clients, but with we were the number 2s, if you like, because we were the managers rather than the partners. And we were doing this with people who were the number 2s in their organizations, by and large, but who might be in a position to influence additional work and or relationships that we might build on as they progressed and became finance directors or CFOs in their own right. Mm-hmm. And so if there are opportunities that you can create like that, it may not win work initially. It might even cost something in terms of paying for the meals. But it's a great way of building your skills and the confidence that you need to be successful here in winning more tax work.
Yeah. So the impression.
Sorry, go on.
So the impression I'm getting then, Mark, actually, is almost like your key to winning work is through building strong relationships with people in some form or other way. Am I making it oversimplified with that, or is that?
You are not oversimplifying it at all. It's all about building relationships, helping others, looking for opportunities to help them. People buy tax advice and compliance services from people they know, like, and trust when they need those services. And if you go to networking events or conferences or anywhere, you're unlikely to meet someone who just happens to need tax advice the day you meet them. Indeed, much of the networking that we all do is with other professionals and contacts who we may want to act as an advocate with their clients, and they'll want the same with us. So that means we have to keep in touch with the people that we meet, demonstrate we can be trusted, and find a reason to follow up with everybody that we meet as well, and to be of help and service to them. And the more we do that, and we want work from the people we meet, we'll recognize they want the same from us. And if we are able to act as their advocates to introduce them to people that may benefit from their services, then it becomes easier to expect them to do the same for us. Mm-hmm. So being helpful first, and go back to the Stephen Covey quote, seek first to understand, then to be understood. Seek first to offer help, then to be helped.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense. So obviously the one aspect is building that strong relationship and helping them, etc. But then almost at the part where I find it more difficult or not really sure how to do this is, how do you go from building the relationship to making them clearly understand what you do so they know when they've got someone in a position to be referred or sent over to you, if that makes sense?
It makes perfect sense, and I hope you don't mind me suggesting it's the wrong question.
Okay, go on. And what's the right question? And that can you answer?
It's a very common question. Well, the question is finding out enough about them, expressing genuine interest to find out what they need, and only then offering help and support. And the more you do that to other people, they will then ask you, all right, and what is it you do exactly, Jack? I know you do something in tax. Is it employment related? And I'm going to do it again. I have the 4 suits approach to having more powerful conversations. I didn't think I was going to talk about this. 4 suits from a pack of cards. 4 suits from a pack of cards: clubs, hearts, spades, diamonds. So at the beginning of your conversations, you start with spades. You're digging around, breaking the ice, looking to find out something about the person you're talking to. And moving on to hearts, you're looking to build rapport, something you have in common with them. You have a heartfelt joint interest or something. And it doesn't have to be work related. It could be football. It could be the hassle you had arriving at the venue. It could be the heat. It could be family. It could be anything, but something where you're building an emotional connection, heart. The third part of the conversation is clubs. And clubs is where you talk about clients of yours who are in the same club as the person you're talking to, or the same club as their clients. And you can only do that if you've asked some effective opening questions when you were digging around with your metaphorical spade to find out about them. Because then when you talk about what you do that using stories that they will relate to, and you know that they will relate to them because you are making them relevant to what you know about them already. So spade, hearts, clubs, and then the 4th suit is diamonds. The crucial thing you need to do is to follow up effectively afterwards, promise you will do something, and do it by way of follow up and keep in touch with them. And you will build the relationship to the extent that they are in a position to introduce the right sort of work to you, rather than just thinking, Jack does tax. Right, I've got this international tax client. I'll get in touch with Jack.
Yeah.
Or the VAT client or whatever. Yeah.
So a follow-on question then, and you might tell me this is besides the point, but should you then try and go to network events or build relationships with people where you feel like there's a bigger chance that you will be able to help each other in terms of client referrals, or should you just, I suppose, not really think about that initially, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. The first thing you need to do, depending on where you are in your career and where you are in terms of networking, and of course we're post-pandemic now, so networking events are opening up, is to get out there and either build or rebuild your confidence in talking to strangers. We have a problem with networking events, which we can blame our parents for, because our parents told us when we were young, don't talk to strangers, which puts some of us off. It's also the fact, and you alluded to it earlier, Jack, many of the people who go into tax go into it because they like studying, they like the detail, they may not be as extrovert as many others. And I know I come across very extrovert. I've had to work on that over the years. And it's quite common that a lot of tax people are more introverted than extroverted. And the amazing thing that I love to share with tax people here is introverts make better networkers than extroverts. Why is that? Because introverts are more likely to ask questions and to listen to the answers, whereas extroverts just want to talk about themselves. And you don't do very well at networking events if all you're doing is talking about yourself.
No, and I would also add, actually, I think if you're an introvert, you're more likely to speak to, say, 1 or 2 people and build a good relationship or connection with them, whereas an extrovert is probably going to try and speak to everyone, then have lots of meaningless connections, let's say, so they become forgettable straight away, I would say, in those cases.
You are absolutely right, Jack. That's very astute. And I talked about the 5 M's before. If you go to a networking event, what's your objective? What's your motive? Your motive is not to get work. Your motive is to try and identify and establish 3 new potential introducer relationships, for example.
Bit of kind of almost like a scenario for you here, because particularly for me, and I think probably for many other tax advisors as well that work within accountancy firms, I think they just don't seem to do a good job of almost what I would call fully utilising their current client base to kind of find more workers. Most of the time, there's just a client, one team provides a service to them. It might only be one service, and that's it. To me, that seems like a massive waste, because you've got someone in your firm that's got a relationship with someone, they're trusted, they understand the business, they will know about other things that the business as a whole can help them with, if you see what I mean. But I also know at the same time that people worry about seeming salesy, which I think is probably the main reason people put this off. Do you kind of have any advice or tips at all around that to kind of try and improve that situation and improve like lead generation from the current client base of the firm that you work for?
I think that's a great question, Jack. And I think it requires a bit of a mindset shift, because if somebody's genuinely interested in helping you and the focus is evidently on helping you, then it's not going to come across as salesy. The problem is, in our heads, we think if we talk about other services and how much it's going to cost, we're going to appear like a slimy salesperson. But in practice, that's not how you'd want to have the conversation. And you put it very eloquently just now when you talked about how somebody's got a strong relationship with the client and understands the client's business. And a genuine interest in the client's business, and then focusing on how and asking them questions as to whether it would be helpful if they better understood this, that, or the other. Or, the best example I can give you, again, dates back, all my examples date back many years from when I was in practice. Somebody came to see me. He was the managing director of a client company. And he'd spoken to people within the firm and talked to people outside the firm. He had shares. He was retired managing director, sorry. He had shares in the company that cost him nothing, and they were now worth 10 million because somebody was going to buy out the company. And the people who'd been doing his tax returns were giving him advice on leaving the country and selling the shares when he was non-resident. The rules were different back then. The audit partner didn't have any better ideas for him. So he was sent to see me as the tax partner, who hadn't previously engaged with him at all. And he'd spoken to some other friends as well, and everybody was coming up with variations on the same idea. And his question was very much along the lines of, so how can I avoid paying 40% tax on this 10 million? Because he thought that's what he needed, the advice he needed. And I said, okay, before we start looking at that, I need to understand more about you and what's going on here. So we're talking about the shares. He had a wife who was a bit of an invalid, couldn't leave the country, didn't want to leave the country without her. He had a son who was in his late teens and didn't want his son to inherit millions of pounds. And so I said to him, look, I'm a little bit confused here. Your focus is on saving 40% tax, but even if you were to pay the 40% tax, you're going to be left with £6 million, which you're not going to be able to spend in your lifetime, and you don't want to leave to your son. So, I'm a tax advisor. My role is to help you reduce your tax bill, but it's also to help you make the right decisions for you and your family and your business. So why the big fuss to try and inconvenience yourself by saving 40% tax? And by the way, the other thing we talked about was there were various tax schemes available at the time to consider, but all of which, and I had developed a very unhelpful talent, which I got even better at over the years, which was helping people understand that the risks and challenges and downsides they might face if they looked to reduce their tax bill too aggressively might outweigh the benefits of reducing the tax bill and wouldn't give them the certainty that they wanted without paying the tax. And that's a very unhelpful talent as a tax advisor if you're not helping rich people pay less tax. Another reason why I moved away from being a tax advisor, I was so good at that. But anyway, this long conversation with him, and the conclusion we reached was that he just didn't want the money to go to the government of the day or whatever it was. So my advice to him was something along the lines, I don't remember the detail now, but it was something along the lines of donating a huge sum to charity and having an endowment in his wife's name with a building that would have his wife's name on it, so her name would live on after she died, because she was, as an invalid, she was likely to predecease him. I cannot tell you how thrilled he was with this idea, because there were reliefs which meant if the money went, I think the idea was he'd give the shares to charity before they were sold, before the company floated, or whatever it was. Millions of pounds went to charity. My client was delighted, but I hadn't done any of the conventional things to save him tax, because that's not what he needed.
Yeah. That makes sense. And that was an internal referral as well, wasn't it? That one, by the sounds of it.
I think it was. I don't think I won any. I don't think I won any awards from the general practice partner who referred it to me, because there was £10 million here, and I wasn't putting him into a tax scheme that would generate tens of thousands of pounds for the firm. But I was doing what was right for the client.
Yeah. So I think that's probably almost the point to take away from that story then, isn't it? When it comes to like internal referrals and stuff, think about the client and doing the right thing for them. If the right thing to do is to suggest another service line because you genuinely think it's going to help them, then go for it. And if it's not, then obviously don't do it.
100%.
So do you think kind of there's any strategies or something that people should stay away from when it comes to trying to win more work? I think I've got an idea of what you might say here, because you've almost like not said this again, but you talked about kind of almost honesty and doing the best thing for the client. So obviously being dishonest or untruthful and just trying to bet yourself is a big no. But is there anything kind of else that springs to mind?
Well, it's a variation on that really, which is the temptation to say yes and going beyond your genuine level of expertise. And the test that I've always applied, and I was doing this at Chiltern, I do it with the Tax Advice Network now, not the test I applied, the test that I recommend accountants and tax people consider is what I call the family members test. So if a client or a colleague asks your opinion on something or your advice on something, and you are not absolutely sure on the answer, just think about if it was a close member of your family, parent, child, brother, sister, loved one, close friend, would you be happy for them to act on your advice without you checking it or getting a second opinion first? And if you would check it or get a second opinion first for a family member, then you should do that with a client or a colleague as well. Mm-hmm. Do not try and bluff it because it will come back to bite you.
If people are listening might want to learn a bit more about you, kind of where's the best place for them to go?
Well, thanks for asking, Jack. On LinkedIn, I'm LinkedIn Bookmark Lee, BOOKMARKLEE. That helps distinguish me from the thousands of other people with my name, including at least half a dozen in the UK accounting profession. In fact, online everywhere, I'm Bookmark Lee. So my domain name, my website is bookmarklee.co.uk, and my Twitter handle is Bookmark Lee as well. So you'll find me from those three easily.
Yeah.
No. And of course, there's also findataxadvisor.online if you want to know more about that website and that service.
Yeah, makes sense. And I will put a link to all those anyway into the show notes for this episode. Episode 11 of the podcast was all about how to increase your chances of winning and converting more tax work without being pushy. So if you like this episode, I suggest you take a listen. I've implemented some of the tips that guest Martin provided in that episode, and they have helped me a lot. You can access the episode in your podcast player of choice or by heading on over to thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP11. All links and materials mentioned in this episode are in the show notes, at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP57. Links and materials includes Mark's taxation article and also details about where you can find out more about Mark and get in contact with him. To make sure you don't miss any future episodes, subscribe or sign up for email notifications at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/subscribe. The emails will give you a brief summary of each episode, which are bi-weekly and are released on Mondays. But that's it for this episode. I hope you liked the episode and have taken away some useful points to help you to progress, develop and improve your tax career. Until next time.